The scream sawed directly into Clara's spine, a raw, endless sound that had worn her nerves to dust. 3 hours. Lily, her newborn daughter, had been screaming for 3 relentless hours. And Clara was a ghost haunting her own life, moving through the dimly lit rooms of their small house on trembling legs. Her world had shrunk to this, a cycle of desperate rocking, futile shushing, and the crushing guilt that she couldn't soothe her own child. Across the room, a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the fireplace. Bear, their massive, shaggy-haired rescue dog, padded silently across the rug. He didn't come to her. He went to the bassinet, his large, wet nose nudging the edge. He let out a soft, concerned whine, a sound so full of sheer anxiety that it almost broke Clara. Almost, but she was too far gone for comfort. "I know, Bear," she whispered, her voice raspy from exhaustion. "I don't know what to do either." This was the new normal. She looked at the clock, waiting for the sound of Mark's car. He was working the grueling night shift at the new logistics warehouse on the edge of town, trying to make ends meet after her maternity leave cut their income. He'd stumble in at dawn, his eyes hollow, smelling of cold air and fatigue, just as her own day of solitary confinement was beginning. They were 2 ships passing in a fog of exhaustion, their communication reduced to terse notes on the fridge and shared, helpless looks over their wailing daughter. Before Lily, it had been different. Bear had been their first baby, a clumsy, 70-pound puppy with paws too big for his body and a heart that overflowed with a simple, unwavering devotion. He'd been a gift from Mark's brother after a particularly rough year, and he glued himself to their little family. When Clara had been pregnant, he'd rested his head on her growing belly, his tail thumping slowly. He'd whine softly when Lily kicked, as if talking back to a secret song. The day they brought Lily home from the hospital, Bear had been waiting at the door. He'd sniffed the tiny, blanket-swaddled bundle in Clara's arms with a reverence that felt ancient. He gave one slow lick to a miniature, curled fist, and then settled himself on the floor beside the bassinet. Clara remembered the wave of relief that had washed over her. Asterisk, he accepts her. He'll protect her. Asterisk the first few weeks. It seemed perfect. Bear was Lily's gentle giant, a living, breathing security blanket. But then the cracks began to appear. It started subtly about a month in. Clara noticed Bear was spending less time roaming the house and more time stationed directly outside the nursery door. She'd find him there in the morning, a furry sphinx guarding the threshold. At first, she thought it was sweet. "Look, Mark," she'd said. "He's on duty." Mark, half asleep, had just grunted in approval. Then the behavior shifted. Bear began to position himself between Clara and the bassinet whenever she approached. He wouldn't growl or bark. He would just be there, a solid, immovable object of fur and muscle. If she reached for Lily, he would gently press his broad head against her hand, not aggressively, but insistently, as if to say, "Not yet." One afternoon, as Clara leaned in to adjust Lily's blanket, Bear did something that made her blood run cold. He carefully, ever so gently, took the corner of the soft, fleece blanket in his teeth and began to pull. He was trying to drag the bassinet, with her baby inside, away from the wall. "Bear, no!" Her voice was sharp, a knife cutting through the quiet. He immediately released the blanket, looking up at her with an expression that wasn't guilt. It was frustration. It was a look of someone trying to give a vital warning in a language the other person refused to understand. At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words. That night, when Mark finally dragged himself through the door just after 5 a.m., Clara was waiting for him, a statue of frayed nerves in the kitchen. "We need to talk about Bear," she said, her arms crossed tightly. Mark sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of his own tiredness. "Clara, not this again. He's just being a good dog. He's protective." "This isn't protective, Mark," she snapped, the words coming out harsher than she intended. It's possessive. He tried to move the crib today, with Lily in it. Mark poured himself a glass of water, his movements slow and deliberate. He was probably just playing. Or he smelled something. You're reading too much into it. You're exhausted. The word exhausted felt like a dismissal. It invalidated her fear, her intuition. The gap between them, fueled by sleeplessness and stress, felt suddenly like a chasm. "What do you want me to do, Clara?" he asked, his voice flat. The words tasted like ash, but she forced them out. "I want him to sleep outside the nursery. Maybe even the garage at night." The silence that followed was louder than Lily's cries. Mark just stared at her, his expression a mixture of hurt and disbelief. They had never, ever considered banishing Bear. He was family, but in that moment, Clara's fear for her child was a wild, untamable thing, and it saw Bear not as family, but as a growing, unpredictable threat. The peace of their home was fractured, and the shadow in the nursery was just beginning to deepen. What happened next would test the very fabric of their family, and the truth was hiding where no one thought to look. The new rule felt like a betrayal, a cold stone of guilt in Clara's stomach, but she clung to it with the desperation of a drowning woman. That first night, she led Bear by his collar out of the nursery after putting Lily down. His confusion was palpable. He kept turning his head, his questioning eyes fixed on the crib until the door closed, severing his line of sight. A moment later, a soft, confused whine seeped through the wood. Clara leaned against the door, her eyes squeezed shut, telling herself it was for the best, for Lily. But Bear did not accept his banishment. He didn't bark or scratch. He simply took up a new post, a silent, furry protest in the hallway. His large body was a permanent, warm obstacle Clara had to step over every time she entered or left the room. He was always there, a living, breathing barricade. His eyes, once soft and dopey, now held a constant, unnerving intensity. They followed her, not with love, but with a deep, unblinking focus that felt like an accusation. The atmosphere in the house thickened. Claire's exhaustion now had a sharp, paranoid edge. Every soft whine from Bear sounded like a threat. Every time he shifted his weight, she flinched. She found herself talking to him in a low, tense voice she didn't recognize. "Stay," she would command, pointing to the spot, as if he were a stranger's dog. Mark tried to bridge the growing divide. "He's just worried about her, Clara," he said one morning, watching Bear's fixed stare at the nursery door. "He doesn't understand why he's been locked out. He doesn't have to understand." Clara retorted, the baby monitor clutched in her white-knuckled hand. "I'm the mother. I need to be able to reach my child without going through a checkpoint." She gestured at Bear, who hadn't moved for hours. "It's not a checkpoint, it's a dog," Mark said, his patience wearing thin. "Our dog, the one who slept at your feet every night for 4 years." The remark stung because it was true. It fueled her guilt, which in turn fueled her resolve. She couldn't afford to be sentimental. Her priority was the tiny, vulnerable human in the next room. A few days later, the subtle blockade escalated into a direct confrontation. Lily had been particularly fussy, and Clara had just managed to get her to sleep after an hour of pacing. She lowered the sleeping infant into the crib with the slow, deliberate movements of a bomb disposal expert. As she turned to leave, a shadow filled the doorway. Bear. He must have slipped in when her back was turned. He moved the crib and stood, not lying down but rigid, his nose pointed at the wall behind it, his body a wall of tension. A hot flash of anger surged through Clara. This was her one moment of peace, her brief respite, and he was invading it. "Out!" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. He ignored her. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. It wasn't the sound of aggression she'd seen in dog attack videos. It was deeper, more primal. A sound of pure, unadulterated warning. From inside the wall, she heard a faint, metallic tick, but she dismissed it as part of their struggle. Fear and fury became a toxic cocktail. She marched over and grabbed his collar. "I said out." What followed was a silent, terrifying battle of strength. Bear planted his feet, his powerful leg muscles locking. He was an anchor. Clara pulled, her slippers slipping on the polished floor. She was no match for him. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was simply refusing to be moved. He was a guardian defying an order he knew to be wrong. "Let Gio!" she cried out, her voice rising hysterically. From a crib, Lily stirred, letting out a small, sleepy whimper. The sound seemed to break Bear's focus for a split second. He turned his head, and in the dim glow of the nightlight, Clara saw his eyes. They were wide, pleading, filled with a desperation so profound it momentarily froze her. It was the look of someone trying to scream a warning through soundproof glass. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a shaky, unnerving confusion. What if she was wrong? What was he so desperately trying to tell her? Her grip on his collar loosened. Bear immediately returned to his post, pressing his body against the crib bars, a low, continuous whine now mixing with his tense panting. Defeated, Clara backed out of the room. She closed the door and slid down to the floor, her heart hammering. She could feel Bear's weight settle against the other side. He had won. He was staying. That was the moment Clara's fear crystallized into a cold, hard decision. This couldn't continue. Tomorrow, she would make calls. Not just to the vet, but to a trainer. Maybe even to a rescue organization. The thought, we might have to rehome him, formed like an ice crystal in her chest, cold and sharp and final. The image of Bear's desperate eyes haunted her, but she hardened her heart. She was the mother. She had to protect her child, even if it meant breaking her own. She fell into a fitful sleep on the couch, unaware that just on the other side of the nursery wall, the silent, hidden threat was smoldering, inching closer to catastrophe with every passing second. Bear knew, and as the first gray light of dawn approached, his silent vigil was about to turn into a desperate, final alarm. The wall of fur was the only thing standing between Lily and a danger no human could see. The decision solidified in the cold light of morning. Lying on the couch where she'd finally collapsed, Clara watched dust motes dance in the pale sunbeams cutting through the window. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, oppressive silence. The confrontation with Bear played on a loop in her mind, the low growl, the locked muscles, the desperate eyes. Her fear had curdled into a grim resolution. Today, she would make the calls. Today, she would fix what felt broken. She pushed herself up, her body aching with a fatigue that felt permanent. A sound in the nursery cut through her grim thoughts, not a cry, but soft, contented babbling. Lily was awake and miraculously happy. The rare sound was balm on Clara's raw nerves. For a moment, everything felt normal. Perhaps, she thought, it was a sign. Maybe today would be better. She shuffled down the hallway, the plan for Bear firming up in her mind. She would call the vet first, then a behavioral specialist. There had to be an explanation, a solution that didn't involve the unthinkable. She owed him that much, didn't she? The nursery door was slightly ajar. As she pushed it open, a faint, unfamiliar scent tickled her nostrils, something sharp and acrid, like a burnt plastic pen or overheated electronics. It was out of place, wrong. Her sleep-deprived brain filed it away as unimportant, a remnant of some forgotten mistake. Then she saw Bear. He wasn't lying down. He was standing rigidly beside the crib, a statue of pure tension. Every muscle in his powerful frame was coiled tight, from his hunched shoulders to his stiff tail. His head was low, his ears flat against his skull, his entire being focused on the wall behind the crib. When Clara entered, he didn't turn. He didn't wag his tail. He was a dog transfixed by an invisible horror. "Bear," she said, her voice rough with sleep. Her voice broke his trance. His head whipped around, and then he barked. It wasn't a normal bark. It was a sharp, frantic, explosive sound that tore through the morning's fragile peace. It was a bark of pure, undiluted panic. In the crib, Lily jolted and immediately began to wail. "Bear, what the hell?" Clara cried, her heart lurching into her throat. She rushed forward, her instinct to comfort her child overriding everything else. As she moved toward the crib, Bear didn't growl at her. He didn't snap. In a blur of motion, he lunged between her and the crib, his body a living, breathing wall. He barked again, the sound even more desperate, more insistent. His eyes were wild, pleading with her to see, to understand. And then he did it, the act that would redefine their entire relationship. He rose up on his hind legs, placed his two massive front paws with impossible gentleness on the edge of the crib, and leaned his body over Lily. He wasn't biting. He was covering her, shielding her. He then carefully hooked his paws around her swaddled form and pulled her close against his chest, his own body curving around her like a living fortress. He began to back away from the wall, his movements slow and deliberate, his gaze locked on the threat only he could perceive. "Bear, stop! You're going to crush her!" Clara screamed, her own panic now a mirror of his. But he wasn't crushing her. He was holding her securely, protectively. Lily's cries were fright, not pain. His head was twisted back over his shoulder, his lips pulled back from his teeth in a silent, desperate snarl directed at the wall. In that fractured, heart-stopping second, the puzzle pieces that had been scattered for weeks all slammed together with a terrifying final click. Asterisk the hovering, the blocking, the crib dragging, the growl, not a threat, an alarm, asterisk. The danger was not the dog. The danger was what the dog was looking at. Her anger vanished, vaporized by a cold clarity of terror. "What is it?" she whispered, stepping carefully around him. "What do you see?" She looked at the wall. It was the same wall she saw every day. The same pale yellow paint. The same white electrical outlet, partially hidden by the crib's headboard. The same. She leaned closer. The chemical smell was stronger here, a distinct odor of melting plastic, and something else, something ominously like singed wood. And then she saw it, a thin, almost imperceptible wisp of gray smoke, curling like a malevolent ghost from the tiny seam where the outlet plate met the wall. A black, bubbling scar on the white plastic stain that hadn't been there yesterday. Time had just slowed down. It stopped. The world narrowed to that wisp of smoke, the discolored plastic, and the desperate, heroic dog holding her baby away from it all. He hadn't been possessive. He hadn't been broken. He had been a sentry, a silent alarm they were too human, too blinded by exhaustion and fear to hear. "Oh my God!" The words were a breath, barely audible. Then louder, a sob of realization and horror. "Oh my God!" She moved without thought. She scooped Lily from Bear's embrace, her hand shaking so violently she feared she would drop her. Bear released the baby immediately. He didn't resist. He didn't growl. He let out a single sharp bark that sounded like "go," and began to pace frantically, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor, herding her toward the door. Clara ran. She clutched Lily to her chest, the baby's cries now mingling with her own ragged sobs. The silent alarm was no longer silent. It had finally found its voice, and it had 4 paws and a heart of gold. The race was on, but the real terror was only just beginning. What they would find out in the next few minutes would prove that Bear wasn't just a good dog, he was a miracle. The world outside was a blur of freezing air and blinding panic. Clara stumbled onto the frost-encrusted lawn, her bare feet screaming in protest against the icy blades of grass. She was aware of nothing but the wailing baby in her arms and the frantic pounding of her own heart. The cold was a physical shock, cutting through her thin pajamas, but she barely felt it. The only thing that felt real was the solid, warm pressure Bear pressing insistently against her legs, nudging her further away from the house, his mission not yet complete. He positioned himself in front of her and Lily, facing their home. His body was still rigid, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest, a final, defiant warning to the threat that had invaded his domain. He was no longer just a pet. He was a sentinel on duty, and his family was his post. As they stood there, Clara's mind raced, replaying the past weeks. The blocking, the growling, the desperate attempt to move the crib. At the time, each act felt like a threat. Now, standing in the cold, she saw them for what they were. Not a series of attacks, but a chain of desperate warnings. He hadn't been trying to keep her from Lily. He had been trying to keep Lily from the danger in the wall. Every single time, the commotion began to draw attention. A curtain twitched in the house across the street. Then a door opened. Old Mr. Peterson, their neighbor who was usually out for his morning walk at this time, came hurrying over, his face etched with concern. "Clara, good Lord, what's happened? Are you hurt?" Clara could only shake her head, her teeth chattering too violently to form words. She pointed a trembling finger toward Lily's window. As she did, she saw it more clearly now from the outside. A faint, dark haze was beginning to cloud the lower part of the window pane from the inside, like a dirty fog rolling in. The wall, she managed to gasp. It's fire. Mr. Peterson's eyes widened. He pulled out his phone, his own hands shaking slightly. I'm calling 911 again. They need to hurry. It was then that the sound began, the glorious, deafening wail of sirens in the distance. The sound grew from a faint promise to an overwhelming roar, and within moments, the street was filled with the blinding red and white lights of two massive fire engines. The sheer speed and efficiency of the responders was a surreal contrast to Clara's frozen helplessness. Men and women in heavy, dark turnout gear moved with a choreographed urgency, unraveling thick hoses and barking commands she couldn't understand. A firefighter with Captain Reyes emblazoned on his helmet broke away and strode toward her. "Ma'am, are you Clara? Is everyone out of the house?" His voice was calm but firm, a rock in her swirling chaos. Clara nodded, clutching Lily tighter. "My baby, her room, the outlet in the wall." Captain Reyes nodded, his eyes sharp and assessing. He glanced at the window, saw the haze, and his expression hardened. "We're on it. Stay right here." He turned and shouted to his team, his voice cutting through the noise. "We have a confirmed electrical fire. Room at the front. Wall cavity involvement. Let's move." Clara watched, her body numb, as they disappeared into her home. The sound that followed was the most horrifying of her life, the brutal, splintering crash of an axe tearing into the drywall of her daughter's nursery. Each blow felt like a physical strike. They were dismantling the sanctuary she had so carefully built, but they were doing it to save it, just as the firefighters emerged briefly to haul in a different piece of equipment. A car door slammed. Mark came sprinting across the lawn, his face a mass of pure, undiluted terror. He had gotten Clara's frantic, nearly incoherent call just as he was leaving the warehouse. "Clara! Lily!" he yelled, his eyes wild, scanning them for injury. He skidded to a halt in front of them, his hands reaching out but not quite touching, as if afraid they might break. "Are you okay? What happened?" Mr. Peterson pointed toward the house. "Electrical fire, Mark. In the nursery." Mark's face went from white to a sickly gray. "The nursery?" He looked at Clara, his eyes begging for an explanation she didn't have the breath to give. He pulled them both into a crushing embrace, his body shaking with relief and a dawning horror. It was then that Bear, who had been silently standing guard, nudged his way into the family huddle, pushing his head between them. For the first time in weeks, no one pushed him away. Mark's hand automatically came down and buried itself in the thick, familiar fur of Bear's neck. The wait that followed was an eternity, compressed into 20 agonizing minutes. Finally, Captain Reyes emerged from the front door, pulling off his helmet. His face was smudged with soot and sweat, and his expression was grim. He walked directly over to them. "You folks got lucky," he said without preamble, his voice blunt with the weight of his experience. "Extremely lucky." He explained that the old wiring behind the nursery outlet had been degrading for months, the insulation slowly crumbling away from decades of use and the constant low draw of a plug-in nightlight. The wires had finally overheated to the point of ignition, setting the ancient, dry insulation and wooden studs inside the wall cavity ablaze. "We found the ignition point," Captain Reyes said, his gaze shifting from Clara to Mark. It was directly behind the head of the crib. The wood was already charred and smoldering. It was a fully developed fire, but it was starved for oxygen, trapped inside the wall. It's what we call a slow burn. Clara felt the world tilt. We didn't smell anything. Not really, just a little this morning." "You wouldn't have," the captain interrupted, not unkindly. "Not until it burned through the drywall. By the time you saw real smoke pouring into the room, the ceiling and the attic space would have been fully involved. The outcome would have been very different." He didn't need to elaborate. The unspoken words, asterisk fatal, tragic, devastating asterisk, hung in the cold air between them. Mark's arm tightened around Clara. "My God," he whispered. The words choked. Then Clara found her voice, soft but clear with a newfound, heartbreaking certainty. Our dog knew." Captain Reyes' attention turned to Bear, who sat alert at Clara's feet, his job finally done. The firefighter gave a slow, respectful nod. I've seen it before. Dogs can detect the subtle changes in temperature we can't feel. Their sense of smell is so acute, they can pick up the scent of overheating plastics and metals long before any smoke alarm goes off. He paused, making direct eye contact with Clara. That dog's behavior? That wasn't a dog being bad. That was a dog trying to be a hero. He probably saved your daughter's life. Saved your daughter's life. The words didn't just land. They physically buckled her knees. Mark's arm was the only thing holding her up. They slammed into her soul, erasing every moment of frustration, every fearful thought, every thought of sending him away. The guilt that washed over her was so profound it was a physical pain. She looked down at Bear, at his loyal, waiting face, and the tears finally came hot, silent streams of shame and overwhelming gratitude. The lie she had told herself that Bear was a threat shattered into a million pieces, leaving behind nothing but the raw, stunning truth. The ride to Mark's mother's house was a silent journey through a world that looked the same but felt completely different. Clara sat staring blankly at the passing streets, the fire captain's words, "Save your daughter's life," echoing in her mind like a church bell. Each repetition was a hammer blow of guilt and awe. In the back seat, Lily, exhausted from the ordeal, slept in her car seat, and right beside her, sitting upright and watchful, was Bear. His dark eyes occasionally met Clara's in the rearview mirror, and each time a fresh wave of shame washed over her. There was no accusation in his gaze, only a quiet, steady certainty that made her feel even smaller. She had been so sure, so absolutely convinced that the threat was the loyal, loving animal now panting softly in the back seat. She had looked into his desperate, pleading eyes and seen a monster. She had prepared to banish him, to potentially give him up, all while the real monster, silent, patient, and lethal, smoldered in the walls of her child's room. Mark reached across the console and took her hand, his grip firm. "We're all safe," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the only thing that matters." But it wasn't the only thing that mattered to Clara. The how of their safety was a weight she would carry forever. It was a story of her failure and Bear's unwavering heroism. When they pulled into the driveway of his mother's cozy, cluttered home, Susan rushed out, her face pale with worry. She wrapped Clara, then Mark, then the sleeping Lily, in fierce hugs. When she turned to Bear, she didn't hesitate, bending down to scratch behind his ears. "And you brave boy," she murmured. Bear's tail thumped once against the car door in acknowledgement. Inside, surrounded by the comforting smells of lemon polish and baked goods, the adrenaline finally began to recede, leaving Clara feeling hollowed out and brittle. Susan made tea while Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. Unable to stop trembling, Susan began to speak, her voice soft. "Oh, Clara, you must have been so terrified." "I almost sent him away, Susan," Clara whispered, the confession tearing from her throat, cutting her off. "I was going to call someone today. I thought he was dangerous. I was ready to make him someone else's problem." Susan sat down opposite her, her wise, kind eyes full of compassion. "Oh, Clara, you were exhausted. You were scared. You were trying to protect your baby. Any mother would have been terrified by that behavior." "But I was wrong," Clara said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "He was trying to protect her too, and I was too blind to see it. I was ready to throw away the very thing that saved her." Later, after Lily was settled in a borrowed playpen in the guest room, Clara found herself wandering the hallway. She stopped outside the closed door, behind which her daughter slept. And there, as she knew he would be, was Bear. He was lying across the threshold, his head on his paws, his body once again a barrier between his charge and the world. But this time, the sight didn't fill Clara with dread. It filled her with profound, aching gratitude. She sank to the floor beside him, the tears coming in earnest now. She didn't try to stop them. She wrapped her arms around his thick, strong neck, buried her face in familiar scent of his fur, a scent that now smelled like loyalty, like courage, like home. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words muffled and thick with tears. "I'm so sorry, Bear. I didn't understand. I thought you were the danger. Can you ever forgive me?" Bear turned his massive head. He didn't whine or bark. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes deep and ancient. Then he lifted a heavy paw and placed it gently in her lap. He gave her face a single rough, cleansing lick, washing away the tears. It was an absolution. In that gaze, she saw no record of her mistakes, no tally of her distrust. She saw only the steady, patient love of a creature who had known his purpose all along, even when his own family had lost faith in him. Mark found him there an hour later. Clara asleep with her head resting on Bear's side, the dog's paws still resting protectively across her lap. He didn't say a word. He just looked at them, his family, whole, safe, and forever changed, and knew in his heart that their story had been rewritten not by a tragedy, but by a miracle with 4 paws and a heart of pure, uncomplicated devotion. He knelt down and ran his hand over Bear's head. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Bear's tail thumped softly on the carpet, a quiet acceptance of gratitude, a silent promise that he never would. The weight of the truth was heavy, but it was a weight they would now carry together, a bond forged in the smoke and fear of mourning that had almost taken everything, but had instead given them a second chance and a lesson in love they would never forget. The journey of healing had begun, but the road back to normalcy would be long, and it would be built on a foundation of trust that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. The next few days passed in a slow, dreamlike haze. Susan's home became a sanctuary, a bubble of borrowed normalcy where the sharp edges of their trauma could slowly soften. The initial, paralyzing shock began to recede, replaced by a deep bone-level exhaustion and a quiet, persistent hum of anxiety. Clara found herself jumping at the sound of the tea kettle whistling or the furnace kicking on. Every faint, unfamiliar smell-aid candle Susan lit. The neighbor's barbecue sent a jolt of primal fear through her system. She was hypervigilant in a way she had never been before, her nerves constantly replaying the sight of that wisp of smoke. But through it all, there was Bear. His presence was no longer a source of tension, but a grounding force, a living, breathing security system. He seemed to understand the new, unspoken rules of his temporary life. His bed was placed directly beside the playpen, in the guest room. When Clara would wake from a nightmare, sweating and disoriented, she would find him already awake, his head raised, his ears perked, as if standing guard over her dreams. He would meet her eyes in the dark and let out a soft, reassuring huff before settling back down. The dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. Clara no longer gave him commands. She made requests. "Bear, could you watch her for a moment while I use the bathroom?" He would amble over and sit by the playpen, his presence a more effective monitor than any baby gadget. She found herself talking to him constantly, voicing her fears and her gratitude in a steady, quiet stream. "I can't stop thinking about what almost happened," she confessed to him one afternoon as Lily napped. He rested his chin on her knee, his weight of comfort. "Thank you for being more patient than I was." Mark, too, was changed. The guilt of having been absent, of having dismissed Clara's concerns, sat heavily on him. He was more present, more attentive. His phone left in another room when he was home. He took over more night feedings, insisting Clara try to sleep, and his relationship with Bear deepened into one of profound respect. He'd come home from running errands and would specifically greet Bear first, kneeling down to scratch his chest and tell him, "Good job, buddy. Good job watching our girls." A week after the fire, they met with the insurance adjuster and a contractor at their damaged home. Walking through the front door was a surreal and gut-wrenching experience. The air still carried a faint, acrid smell beneath the scent of fresh air from the open windows. The hallway leading to the nursery was water-stained from the fire hoses. And then they entered the nursery. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. It was a scene of devastation. A large, jagged hole was torn in the wall where the crib had been. Inside the cavity, the charred, blackened skeletons of wall studs were visible, the insulation reduced to brittle, gray ash. The white outlet was now a melted, grotesque shape, a dark scar surrounding it. The beautiful pale yellow wall was stained with soot and water. The crib itself was shoved into the center of the room, splintered and damaged by the firefighters' axes. This was the epicenter. The contractor, a burly man named Joe, said matter-of-factly, "The wiring in this whole wall is a complete loss. You're lucky the fire didn't jump into the attic. You'd be looking at a total rebuild." He explained the process. The entire house needed to be rewired, not just this room. The old, cloth-insulated wiring was a ticking time bomb. They were to tear open walls in several places, a messy, invasive, and expensive process. As Joe talked about junction boxes and modern code, Clara's eyes were fixed on a hole in the wall. She could visualize it so clearly. Lily sleeping peacefully, unaware that just inches from her head, a fire was slowly consuming the very structure of her room. And Bear, standing guard, his body the only shield between his family and the invisible inferno. "We'll do it," Mark said, his voice firm, cutting through Joe's technical explanations. "Whatever it takes. We want it done right. We want it safe." Clara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. This wasn't just a repair, it was a redemption. They were not just fixing a house. They were rebuilding their foundation, literally and metaphorically. They were going to create a home where trust was baked into the very walls. That evening, back at Susan's, Clara pulled out her laptop. She fell into internet rabbit holes about canine senses, devouring stories of dogs who sniffed out illness, predicting seizures, and yes, smelling the unique scent of overheating wires. She was building a new understanding, a scientific and emotional framework for the miracle they had experienced. She wasn't just a traumatized mother anymore. She was a student, determined to understand the hero who shared her home. And as she read, her resolve hardened. Their new home wouldn't just be safe from electrical fires. It would be a sanctuary that honored the bond they now shared with Bear, a place where his instincts would never again be doubted. The nightmare had left them with a terrible clarity about what was truly important, and they were not going to waste it. The path forward was clear, but it would require them to confront the full scope of what they had almost lost and to make a decision that would change their family forever. The decision to completely rewire the house was a financial earthquake, but one they faced with strange, grim acceptance. The quotes from the contractors were staggering, numbers they would have once dismissed as impossible. Now, they were just numbers on a page, the cost of the future. They liquidated savings, took out a small home equity loan, and made a pact of fiscal austerity that would define the next few years of their lives. There was no debate, no resentment. It was the price of peace, the tuition for the brutal lesson they had learned. Clara threw herself into the process with a fervor that bordered on obsession. This wasn't just about hiring a contractor. It was about understanding, about reclaiming control over the environment that had so nearly betrayed them. She met with Joe, the contractor, not as a hesitant homeowner, but as a partner in the project. She asked questions, demanding simple explanations for complex electrical terms. She learned about AFCI breakers arc fault circuit interrupters that could detect dangerous electrical arcs and shut down power before a fire could start. She insisted they be installed throughout the entire house. "Some folks just do the bedrooms," Joe commented, looking over her detailed notes. "We're not some folks," Clara replied, her voice firm. "Every room, every circuit." She pored over the blueprints of their house, which Joe had sketched out. With a red pen, she marked an X on the wall of the nursery, right where the crib had been. Then she drew a small, simple dog bed icon right beside it. "And this," she said, tapping the icon, "is non-negotiable. Bear's bed goes here. We're going to build a small, recessed nook for it, so it's flush with the wall." She looked Joe directly in the eye. "This isn't a dog bed. It's a sentry post." Joe looked at the sketch, then at Clara, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had a request like that. I like it." This proactive control was Clara's therapy. Every decision, every chosen fixture, every extra safety measure was a stitch sewing up the tear in her sense of security. She wasn't just building a safer nursery. She was architecting a new reality where vigilance was built into the very wiring and trust was given a place of honor. Meanwhile, at Susan's, a new, deeper bond was crystallizing between Mark and Bear. Mark, still wrestling with his own guilt over not being there, began taking Bear on long, meandering walks in the nearby woods. It was during these walks, away from the reminders of the fire, that Mark found himself talking to the dog as he never had before. "You know, I thought she was just tired," he confessed one afternoon, as Bear sniffed at a fallen log. "I thought she was seeing things that weren't there. I should have listened to her. I should have listened to you." He stopped walking and knelt in the leaf litter, put his hands on either side of Bear's face. "I'm sorry, buddy. I won't doubt you again. Ever." Bear responded by licking Mark's chin, then nudging his hand to continue the walk. The forgiveness was absolute, and in its simplicity, it healed a part of Mark that had been festering with regret. The emotional landscape of their little family was shifting. Lily, now 5 months old, was becoming more aware. She would giggle uncontrollably when Bear would amble into her line of sight, her tiny hands reaching for his fur. One afternoon, Clara watched as Bear, lying beside the playpen, carefully extended a single paw and rested on the edge, just within Lily's reach. The baby cooed, grabbing at his toes with her chubby fingers. Bear didn't move, his tail giving a single, soft thump against the floor. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated trust, a world away from the fearful standoff that had defined them just weeks before. But the trauma wasn't gone, it had just changed shape. Clara found she couldn't bear the smell of anything burning. A piece of toast left too long in the toaster would send her heart into a frantic rhythm, her hands shaking as she scrambled to unplug the appliance. She became hyper-aware of every outlet, every power strip, every cord in Susan's house. She would lie awake at night, listening to the house's old bones settle, her mind translating every creak into sound of sparking wires. One such night, she crept out of bed and went to the guest room doorway. Bear was, as always, lying across the threshold. He lifted his head as she approached. Instead of just looking in on Lily, Clara sat down on the floor beside him, leaning her back against the wall. She didn't say anything. She just sat in the dark, her shoulder pressed against his warm, solid side. After a moment, he rested his heavy head in her lap with a sigh. They sat like that for a long time, two guardians in the quiet dark, drawing strength from each other's presence. The fear was still there, but it was no longer a tyrant. It was a shared burden, and in sharing it, its weight became bearable. The blueprints of their home were being redrawn, but so were the blueprints of their hearts. They were building something new, something stronger, with trust as a foundation, and a dog as their cornerstone. The physical reconstruction was about to begin, but the true test will be moving back in, facing the ghosts of that morning, and learning to live not in fear of the past, but in gratitude for their second chance. The walls of their home would soon be whole again, but the journey to feeling truly safe within them was just beginning. The first day of reconstruction felt like a ceremony. The demolition was complete, the scarred, blackened skeleton of the nursery wall carted away to a dumpster. Now, standing in the empty, gutted room, surrounded by the fresh, clean scent of new lumber and the bright yellow of new electrical cables snaking through the open studs, Clara felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was a fragile, tentative feeling, but it was real. Joe and his team worked with a quiet efficiency that Clara found deeply comforting. She visited the house every day, often with Lily in a carrier on her chest and Bear padding alongside her. She needed to see the progress, to witness the transformation with her own eyes. It was a form of exposure therapy. Each new piece of drywall, each newly installed outlet, was a layer of healing over the psychic wound. She watched as the electrician, a young woman named Sam, installed the AFCI breakers in the new panel, explaining how they worked. "It's like a super smart detector for your wiring," Sam said. "It can tell the difference between a normal arc, like from a light switch, and a dangerous, sparking one that could start fire." Clara listened, absorbing the information like a lifeline. This was the technology that would stand guard when they couldn't. The most poignant moment came when Joe framed out the small, recessed nook for Bear's bed beside where the crib would go. It was a simple, square indentation in the wall, low to the ground. "We'll put some nice trim around it, paint it to match," Joe said. "Make it look built in." Clara ran her hand over the raw with the nook, her throat tight. This small architectural detail was more than just convenient. It was a testament, a permanent, physical acknowledgement of Bear's role in their family. It was his badge of honor, built into the very structure of their home. But the healing wasn't linear. One afternoon, as Sam was testing the circuits, a loud pop followed by a zap echoed from a hallway. It was just a faulty light bulb blowing, a normal, harmless occurrence. But the sound was a trigger. Time folded in on itself. The sharp, ozone smell of the popping bulb mixed with a memory of acrid smoke in her nose. Clara was suddenly back on the frosty lawn, Lily's wails in her ears. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her breath caught in her throat, and her vision tunneled. She stumbled back, clutching Lily, a silent scream trapped in her chest. Bear, who had been lying in his unfinished nook, was on his feet in an instant, but he didn't run toward the sound. He moved to Clara, pressing his full weight against her trembling legs. He nudged her hand with his nose, a firm, grounding pressure, and let out a soft, questioning whine. Asterisk, I'm here. You're safe. Asterisk. The spell broke. Clara sucked in a ragged gasp of air, the present moment snapping back into focus. She looked down at Bear, at his concerned eyes, and then at Sam, who was apologizing profusely. Just a bulb. Totally normal, I'm so sorry. It's okay, Clara managed, her voice shaky. She sank to her knees, wrapping one arm around Bear, the other still cradling Lily. The fear had been real, but so was the response. Bear hadn't just saved them from the fire. He was now helping to save her from the aftermath. That evening, she told Mark about it. It was like I was right back there, she whispered in the dark of their temporary bedroom. But Bear, he knew. He pulled me out of it. He's not just a pet anymore, is he? Mark said, his voice soft. No, Claire agreed. He's something more. He's part of our foundation. As the weeks passed and the nursery took shape, Clara began to reclaim the space. She chose a new paint color, a soft, calming sage green, far from the original yellow. She rolled the first coat onto the new drywall herself, the smooth, repetitive motion meditative. With each stroke, she was not just applying paint. She was sealing the past away, creating a new canvas for their future. The room was being reborn, and so was she. The final piece was the crib. When the new, sturdy one was delivered, Clara and Mark assembled it together in the center of the freshly painted room. Bear watched the entire process, his head tilted, as if supervising. When it was finally upright, they didn't immediately move it against the wall. Instead, Clara brought in Bear's new, plush bed and placed it inside the built-in nook. It fit perfectly. Bear walked over, sniffed it, then turned a circle and settled into it with a contented, sighing groan. He looked up at them, his tail thumping softly against the sides of the nook. He was home. His watch had officially resumed. The nursery was ready. It was safer, smarter, and built with a new understanding of what protection meant. But the true test still lay ahead. The first night. Could they sleep, truly sleep, knowing what had once lurked in these walls? Could Clara quiet the part of her mind that would always remember? The new room was a fortress, but the strongest walls now were the ones they had built around each other, with a loyal, furry guardian at the center. The foundation was laid, the walls were strong, but the final step in their journey learning to trust the silence was still to come. The night would bring the ultimate challenge, a test of nerves and the strength of their hard-won peace. The movers had left. The last box was unpacked. Their belongings, once scattered between their old life and Susan's spare room, were now integrated into the rebuilt house. An unnatural quiet settled over the home, a silence that felt both peaceful and pregnant with memory. The familiar creaks and sighs of the house were now loaded with new meaning. Every snap of the settling foundation made Clara's shoulders tense. Every hum from the new electrical panel was a sound she was still learning to trust. The nursery, in the soft glow of the twilight coming to the window, was a beautiful, serene space. The sage green walls were calming. The new, solid crib stood against the wall, now a safe distance from any outlet. And built flush into the wall, right beside it was Bear's nook, his bed a perfect fit inside it. He had already claimed it, lying there with his chin resting on the edge, watching as Clara gave Lily her final bottle of the evening. "You ready for this?" Mark asked softly, coming to stand in the doorway. He was holding 2 wine glasses. "No!" Clara answered honestly, not taking her eyes off Lily's sleepy, contented face. "But we have to start sometime." She finished feeding Lily, burped her, and then, with a deep breath, lowered her into the crib. The baby sighed, snuggled into her blanket, and closed her eyes. It was so normal, so perfect, and yet Clara's heart was pounding. She stood there for a long moment, just watching the steady rise and fall of Lily's chest. Bear, from his nook, let out a soft woof. He shifted, turning his body slightly to face the room more fully, his ears perked. He was on duty. Clara and Mark retreated to the living room, leaving the nursery door open wide. They sat on the couch, sipping their wine, not talking. The monitor was on the coffee table, its screen showing the peaceful scene in the nursery. They were both listening, waiting for a sound that didn't belong. An hour passed. The house was silent, except for the occasional rustle from Bear's bed as he repositioned himself. Clara's anxiety was a live wire. She found herself staring at the monitor, her eyes straining to see if that dreaded wisp of smoke would appear in the corner of the screen. It was irrational the wiring was brand new. The breakers were state-of-the-art, but trauma wasn't rational. "Maybe one of you should sleep in there," Clara whispered, her voice tight. Mark took her hand. "We can't, Clara. We have to trust it. We have to trust him." He nodded toward the monitor, where Bear was now sitting up in his nook, alert but calm, his gaze fixed on the crib. He was their early warning system, more sensitive than any technology they could buy. Another hour ticked by. Exhaustion began to weigh heavily on Clara. Her eyelids drooped. She leaned against Mark's shoulder, the warmth of the wine and the sheer fatigue pulling her toward sleep. Just as she was about to drift off, a sound from the monitor jolted her awake. A crackle. Her eyes flew open. Mark was already tense beside her. They both stared at the monitor. There was no smoke. Lily was still asleep. But Bear was on his feet now, his body rigid, his head cocked. Clara's first instinct was not to look at the screen, but to smell the air, a subconscious search for the ghost of acrid smoke. Then the sound came again. Not an electrical zap, but a soft, staticky crackle. It was coming from the baby monitor itself. The device, old and occasionally finicky, was picking up interference, a common, harmless glitch that had happened a dozen times before. But in this new, hypervigilant context, it was a trigger. Clara felt a familiar panic rising, the cold sweat, the tightening chest. On the monitor, they watched Bear. He took a step forward, sniffing the air near the crib. He then turned and looked directly at the camera, at the baby monitor on the dresser, and let out a single low woof. It wasn't a panic bark. It was an announcement. Asterisk, I've identified the sound. It's this thing. It's not a threat. Asterisk. He looked back at the crib, circled once, and then settled back into his nook, his duty done. The simplicity of his action was profoundly calming. He had assessed the situation, identified the source of the noise, and deemed it safe. He wasn't anxious. He was certain. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The tension seeped out of her shoulders. She looked at Mark, and she saw the same relief mirrored in his eyes. "He's got this," Mark murmured. Clara nodded, finally believing it. They finished their wine in a new, genuine silence. The fear wasn't gone, but it was no longer in the driver's seat. It was a back seat passenger, quieted by the steadfast presence of their guardian. When they finally went to bed themselves, Clara paused outside the nursery. Bear was lying down again, but his eyes were open, watchful. Lily was deep in peaceful sleep. Clara didn't go in. She didn't need to check the outlet or smell the air. She just looked at Bear and whispered, "Good night, brave boy." His tail gave 2 soft thumps against the side of his nook in response. That night, for the first time in months, Clara slept for 5 straight hours. She didn't dream of smoke or fire. She didn't wake up in a panic. When she stirred, it was to the sound of Lily's soft, hungry cries on the monitor, a normal, welcome sound. And on the screen, she saw Bear, already sitting up, waiting patiently for one of them to come, his vigil unbroken, his trust in them finally, fully returned. The first night was over. They had faced the silence, and together, they had found peace within it. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a home again, guarded by a love that had been tested by fire and found unbreakable. Weeks turned into months, and the sharp, jagged edges of the trauma slowly softened, worn down by the gentle, relentless rhythm of routine. The new normal wasn't a sudden arrival, but a gradual settling, like dust in a sunbeam. The sage-green nursery was no longer a place of fraught anxiety, but simply Lily's room. The hum of the new electrical panel became a background noise, a lullaby of safety rather than a trigger for panic. Clara's healing was a slow, deliberate process. She still checked the outlets sometimes, a compulsive habit she doubted would ever fully leave her. But the frantic, heart-pounding fear was gone, replaced by a cautious reverence. She had learned that safety wasn't a guarantee but a practice, and part of that practice was trusting the safeguards they had put in place, both the technological and the living. Bear was the cornerstone of this new routine. His life had found its ultimate purpose. His world revolved around the small human in the crib. His days were a cycle of vigilant naps in his nook, gentle play sessions on the floor with Lily, and his evening patrols a slow, deliberate walk through the house, sniffing at doorframes and baseboards, a habit born from his one great success. Clara and Mark never interrupted this ritual. It was his job, and they respected it. Lily, now a busy toddler, was blossoming into a curious, joyful child, and her bond with Bear was the heart of the household. One Saturday afternoon, Clara was folding laundry on the living room floor while Lily practiced her walking. Bear was lying nearby, chin on his paws, watching. Lily, determined, made a beeline for a bookshelf, her eyes locked on a tempting, shiny book spine. Just as she was about to reach the shelf and potentially pull a heavy book onto herself, Bear was on his feet. He didn't bark or startle her. He simply moved in a smooth, silent arc and positioned his body between her and the shelf, a living, furry roadblock. Lily bumped into him, giggled, and changed direction. Clara watched, her heart swelling with a love so profound it ached. This was the same behavior that had once terrified her, the blocking, the gentle obstruction. Now, she saw it for what it was, a constant, intelligent guardianship. He wasn't just protecting Lily from catastrophic dangers. He was protecting her from the small, everyday bumps and bruises, too. This protection was mobile and adaptive. Later that same day, Clara was unloading the dishwasher. She turned her back for a moment to put a stack of plates away. In that split second, Lily, who had been playing with her blocks, spotted a paring knife on the counter that Clara had used to slice an apple and had forgotten to move. It was just within reach. Lily's eyes widened. The shiny object was irresistible. She reached a chubby hand up. A blur of fur shot across the kitchen. Bear didn't bark. He didn't growl. He moved with silent, breathtaking speed. He inserted his body between Lily and the counter, and with a gentle but firm nudge of his head, he pushed her backward away from the danger. She landed on her well-padded diaper with a look of surprise, then indignation. Clara turned at the sound. She saw Lily sitting on the floor, about to cry, and Bear standing over her, licking her face in apology. Then her eyes fell on the knife on the counter. Her blood ran cold. She sank to her knees, pulling both Lily and Bear into a crushing hug. "Oh, Bear," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thank you." Mark saw it too. He came in from the backyard, catching the tail end of the interaction. He knelt down and ruffled Bear's fur. "You're on duty 24/7, aren't you, pal?" he said, his voice full of affection. "You're the best babysitter we've ever had." The trust was now absolute. They left Lily with Bear for the few minutes it took to run to the bathroom or answer the front door, without a second thought. He was more reliable than any baby gate, more intuitive than any monitor. He was a part of their parenting team, his watchful presence the unbreakable routine upon which their new, peaceful life was built. But as Lily grew, new challenges would arise, and the depth of Bear's devotion would only continue to reveal itself in surprising ways. As Lily approached her first birthday, her world expanded beyond the walls of the nursery and living room. She became a tiny explorer, her curiosity outpacing her coordination. Every day brought new discoveries. The fascinating texture of the kitchen tiles, the mysterious space under the dining table, the captivating rustle of leaves in the backyard. And with every new discovery came a new, potential danger that Clara hadn't previously considered. Through it all, Bear was her shadow. His protection had evolved from the stationary vigil by the crib to a dynamic, mobile defense. He developed what Clara and Mark called the perimeter walk, a slow, constant patrol around whatever space Lily was in, his head on a swivel, identify potential hazards before she even noticed them. One warm afternoon, they were in the backyard. Lily, now steady on her feet while holding on to furniture, was making wobbly attempts to walk on the grass. Clara sat on the patio steps, watching with a smile, while Bear lay a few feet away, his eyes tracking Lily's every move. Lily became fascinated by a bright yellow dandelion. She let go of the patio chair and took 2 teetering steps toward it. Clara held her breath, her phone camera at the ready. But then Lily's momentum carried her past the flower, toward a small, decorative rock garden at the edge of the lawn. In a flash, Bear was up. He didn't run or bark. He simply moved, intercepting her path with his body. When Lily bumped into him, she giggled and tried to push past. Bear gently held his ground, nudging her back toward the soft grass with his head. He's like a fuzzy traffic cop, Mark laughed, coming out with 2 glasses of lemonade. He's better than a baby gate, Clara replied, her heart full. He thinks. This intuitive understanding became their new normal. Bear seemed to possess a map of the house and yard, with every potential threat marked. The sharp corner of the coffee table, the step down into the sunken living room, the low-hanging branch on the rose bush. He didn't just react. He anticipated. But the true test of their unspoken communication came during a family gathering for Lily's first birthday. The house was filled with relatives, laughing, talking, a whirlwind of unfamiliar voices and movements. Lily, overwhelmed by the excitement and sugar, became overstimulated. She started crying, a frantic, overwhelmed wail that nothing could soothe. Clara took her into the quieter nursery. But the damage was done. Lily was inconsolable, her little body trembling with overexertion. Clara rocked her, sang to her, but the cries only intensified. She felt a familiar panic rising. The feeling of being a failure, of not being able to comfort her own child. Then Bear, who had been quietly observing the party from his nook, padded into the room. He ignored Clara and went straight to the rocking chair. He sat down in front of them and let out a single soft woof. Lily's cries hitched for a second. Bear then laid his massive head directly in her lap. The weight and warmth of it was a shock to her system. Her tiny, flailing hands, which had been pushing Clara away, stilled. Her fingers, almost of their own accord, buried themselves in the thick fur of his neck. Bear began to purr. It wasn't a cat's purr, but a deep, resonant vibration that emanated from his chest, a low, rhythmic rumble that was felt more than heard. Clara had read about this, a form of canine biofeedback, a calming signal that could lower heart rates and reduce stress. She watched, mesmerized, as Lily's frantic sobs subsided into hiccups, then into quiet, shuddering breaths. Her body relaxed against Clara's chest, her eyes heavy. Within 2 minutes, she was asleep, her hands still tangled in Bear's fur, his head a comforting weight on her legs. Clara looked at Bear, her eyes wide with wonder. He looked back, his own eyes soft, as if to say, "I've got this too." He hadn't protected her from a physical danger this time. He had protected her from an emotional one. He had reached her in a place where Clara, for all her human love and reasoning, could not. He spoke a language that bypassed words and went straight to the primal, soothing core of her being. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Clara told Mark what had happened. It was like he knew exactly what she needed, she said, her voice filled with awe. He didn't just calm her down, he healed her. Mark nodded, looking at Bear, who was once again asleep in his nook, his duty done. He doesn't just love her, Clara. He knows her, in a way we never will. It was a humbling and beautiful realization. Their family was a triangle, but it was supported by a bond that existed on a different plane, a silent, profound connection between a baby and her dog. Bear was more than a guardian against fires and falls. He was Lily's emotional anchor, her first and most loyal friend, a creature who understood the language of her heart long, before she would ever learn to speak it. Their story was no longer about a single act of heroism, but about the daily, quiet miracle of a cross-species bond that was deepening in ways they were only beginning to understand. And as Lily's world was set to grow even larger, that bond would be the foundation upon which she would learn to navigate it all. The park was a universe of new sensations. The squeak of the swing chains, the rough texture of the wood chips, the distant shouts of other children. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming for Lily. For Clara, it was an exercise in controlled terror. Every stranger, every slightly too high climb on the playground equipment, every moment Lily was out of arm's reach sent a jolt of anxiety through her system. They had come with another mother from their neighborhood group, Sarah, and her son, Ethan. While Sarah sat comfortably on a bench, casually monitoring her son's adventures, Clara was a helicopter in human form, hovering a few feet from Lily, her body tense. "Clara, she's fine," Sarah said gently. "The equipment is designed for toddlers. You have to let her explore a little." Clara knew she was right, but the part of her brain that had been rewired by trauma screamed otherwise. Letting go felt like a physical impossibility. Bear, who had been lying at Clara's feet, seemed to sense the internal conflict. He stood up, gave himself a full-body shake, and then trotted over to where Lily was attempting to navigate a low, curved bridge. He didn't follow her onto the play structure. Instead, he took up position beneath it, his head swiveling to keep her in view as she moved. Lily, emboldened by his presence, ventured further. She moved from a bridge to a small slide, then to a set of steps. Clara watched, her hands clenched, ready to spring forward at the slightest stumble. Then, Lily spotted a flock of pigeons pecking at crumbs near a trash can. With a squeal of delight, she toddled off the padded play surface and onto the concrete path, heading straight for them. The path led toward the parking lot. "Lily, no," Clara called, starting forward, but Bear was already moving. He didn't run. He simply fell into step beside Lily, matching her slow, unsteady pace. He didn't block her or nudge her. He just walked with her, his shoulder brushing against her side, a living, breathing guardrail. Lily reached the pigeons, which fluttered away a few feet. She laughed and kept going, now heading toward the parking lot entrance. Clara's heart hammered. She was about to run and scoop her up, but Bear changed tactics. As they approached the curb that separated the park from the parking lot, he gently stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. He then turned and faced her, blocking the way to the street. Lily patted his head, tried to go around him. He sidestepped, maintaining the barrier. She tried the other side. Again he moved, a furry, immovable wall. Frustrated, Lily plopped down on the grass beside him. Bear lay down next to her, his job done. The boundary had been established. This invisible leash was just as potent in new environments. One weekend, they visited Mark's parents at their lake house. It was a world of new dangers, the water's edge being the most significant. Clara was a bundle of nerves, her eyes glued to Lily as she played on the sandy beach. Bear, after a quick sniffing to her perimeter, established a new rule. He would let Lily run freely on the dry sand, but the moment her feet touched the wet, packed sand near the water, he was there. He wouldn't grab her, but he would plant himself between her and the lake, a silent, furry stop sign. After a few attempts, Lily learned the new boundary. She would play at the water's edge, splashing her hands in the shallows, but she never tried to go further as long as Bear was there. That evening, as they sat around a campfire, Mark's father shook his head in wonder. "I've had dogs my whole life, son. I've never seen one with that kind of judgment. It's not just instinct. It's like he's thinking 3 steps ahead." "He is," Mark said, throwing a stick into the fire. "He's not just watching her. He's anticipating her." Clara leaned back in her chair, watching the firelight dance on Bear's fur as he slept at her feet. One ear twitched toward the cabin where Lily was sleeping. The constant, grinding anxiety that had been her companion for so long was finally, truly, beginning to ease. She wasn't just relying on her own hypervigilance anymore. She was part of a team. She had a partner in protection, one with 4 legs, a wet nose, and a preternatural understanding of the little girl they both loved. The invisible leash wasn't a constraint. It was the ultimate freedom. It allowed Clara to finally, slowly, start to let go. She could breathe again, knowing that even when her own watchfulness faltered, his never would. The world was a big, scary place, but for Lily, it was a playground with perfectly defined borders, all patrolled by her best friend. The county fair was a symphony of chaos, a cacophony of calliope music, shouting vendors, and the delighted screams of children on rides. It was a world of overwhelming color and movement, and for Clara, it was a minefield. She held Lily's hand in a death grip, her eyes constantly scanning the swirling mass of people. Lily, now a vibrant 2-year-old, was a bundle of excited energy, pulling toward the flashing lights and giant, stuffed animals. "Easy, sweetie," Clara said, her voice tight. "Stay close to Mama." Mark walked on Lily's other side, a solid presence, but even he looked strained. "It's busier than I thought," he muttered, his shoulder brushing against a passerby. Bear, on a sturdy leash, walked directly in front of Lily, his body a plow clearing a path through the crowd. People instinctively gave the large, serious-looking dog a wide berth. His head was on a swivel, his ears constantly moving, processing 1,000 sounds at once. He wasn't alarmed, but he was at his highest level of alertness. This was not his territory. The rules were different here. They decided to get in line for the merry-go-round. It was a contained, predictable ride. As they stood waiting, Lily became fascinated by a clown making balloon animals nearby. She tugged on Clara's hand, pointing. "Mama, doggy, balloon doggy." "After the ride, honey," Clara said, distracted by the jostling of the line. The line moved forward. In that single moment of divided attention, Clara looking toward the ride, Mark digging in his pocket for tickets, Lily saw her chance. She slipped her tiny, sweaty hand from Clara's grip and darted toward the clown. It happened in a heartbeat. 1 second she was there. The next, she was swallowed by the forest of adult legs. "Lily!" Clara's scream was pure, undiluted terror. It was a sound ripped from the same place that had cried out on a frosty lawn a lifetime ago. Mark spun around. Where did she go? Panic, cold and sharp, seized them both. They began frantically calling her name, pushing to the crowd, their heads whipping back and forth. The world became a nightmare of unfamiliar faces, a kaleidoscope of danger. But Bear did not panic. The moment Lily's hand slipped away, he had frozen. His nose went into the air, sampling the complex soup of scents. Popcorn, diesel fuel, cotton candy, and 1,000 human smells. And then he found it, the one scent that mattered, the unique, unmistakable signature of his little girl. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He let out a single, sharp pull on the leash, a pull so purposeful and powerful it nearly yanked the leash from Mark's hand. He was a compass needle finding true north. "Bear, what is it?" Mark shouted, but he was already being dragged, and Clara followed, hope and fear warring in her chest. Bear moved with an unerring, single-minded focus. He weaved through the crowd, ignoring the shouts of surprise, his nose to the ground and then back in the air. He led them past the merry-go-round, past the ring-toss game, past a group of teenagers. He was following an invisible trail that only he could see. 50 yards away, Lily had realized her mistake. The clown was gone, and she was surrounded by towering, unfamiliar legs. The noise was suddenly too loud, the lights too bright. Her bottom lip trembled, and a tear traced a clean path through the smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Mama," she whimpered, her voice small and lost. "Dada." Then she saw him, a familiar, shaggy head pushing through the wall of people. Her face lit up. "Beer!" she cried, her toddler tongue unable to master the R. Bear reached her in 3 strides. He didn't jump on her or lick her. He pressed his entire body against her legs, circling her once, creating a safe zone with his own form. He then looked back the way he had come, letting out a single loud, commanding bark, a beacon. Clara and Mark burst through the crowd a second later. Clara fell to her knees, scooping a sobbing Lily into her arms, crying and laughing all at once. Mark dropped to his knees too, wrapping his arms around both of them, his own eyes wet with relief. When they finally pulled apart, Clara looked at Bear. He was sitting now, panting lightly, his job done. The crowd flowed around their little island of reunion, oblivious of the drama, that had just unfolded. He found her, Mark said, his voice full of awe. In all of this, he just knew. Clara hugged Bear, burying her face in his neck. "You never lose her, do you?" she whispered. "You never will." The rest of the fair was a dim backdrop. They left soon after, the thrill of the lights and sounds gone, replaced by the profound, trembling gratitude of a crisis averted. In the car on the way home, Lily fell asleep in her car seat, her hand resting on Bear's head, which was positioned on the console between the front seats. Clara looked back at them, then at Mark. The fire, that was a danger we couldn't see. This was a danger we should have seen. We were right there, and we still lost her. But he didn't, Mark said softly, his eyes on the road. He never will. He's her anchor, Clara, in every storm. The incident at the fair became a new layer in their story. It wasn't just about protecting Lily from physical dangers in their controlled environment anymore. It was about Bear's ability to find her, to be her homing beacon in the vast, confusing world. His loyalty wasn't just a shield. It was a tether, an unbreakable bond that could guide her home from anywhere. The trust they had in him was now absolute, limitless. He had proven himself again, not in the quiet of their home, but in the roaring chaos of the world. He was more than a family pet, more than a guardian. He was a part of their very souls, a constant, loving echo in the crowd that would always call Lily back to safety. As they pulled into their driveway, the safe, familiar house waiting for them, Clara knew that no matter how big Lily's world became, she would always have this, a love that would always find her. And in the final section, we will see how this bond, tested by fire and crowd, becomes a foundation for the rest of their lives. Years have a way of softening the sharpest memories, turning traumatic events into family lore. The fire was no longer an open wound for Clara, but a story she would tell Lily at bedtime, not to frighten her, but to make her understand the extraordinary nature of the ordinary dog sleeping at the foot of her bed. Lily was 5 now, a bright, spirited child with a laugh that could light up a room. The nursery had long since been transformed into a big girl room with bookshelves and a desk. But one feature remained unchanged, the built-in nook beside the bed. It was a little tighter fit for Bear now, his gray-muzzled head spilling over the edge, but he still slept there every night. One evening, after reading a book about a brave knight, Lily looked over at Bear, who was snoring softly. "Mommy," she said, her voice thoughtful, "was Bear ever a knight?" Clara smiled, smoothing the covers. "In a way, sweetheart, he was your knight. He still is." "Tell me the story," Lily requested, as she did many nights. The first story. So Clara began, her voice a familiar, soothing rhythm. She told of the exhausted mommy, the crying baby, and the dog who started acting strangely. She spoke of the fear and the misunderstanding, the moment of thinking the loyal dog was a threat. Lily listened, her eyes wide, even though she knew the ending. She always gasped at the part where Bear hugged her in crib, and she always smiled in relief at the part with the firefighters. "And that's how we learned," Clara finished, as she always did, "that sometimes protection doesn't look the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like resistance. Sometimes it looks like stubbornness. But if you look really close, you'll see that it looks exactly like love." Lily reached out from under the covers and laid her small hand on Bear's head. "I love you, Bear," she whispered. Bear, without opening his eyes, let his tail thump twice against the side of his nook. This was the new, peaceful reality they had built. The hypervigilance had faded into a quiet, deep-seated trust. Bear was slower now. The gray around his muzzle was spreading. He didn't always hear Lily call him from the other room, and sometimes his joints were stiff when he stood up, but his eyes never changed. They were still the same deep, knowing pools of patience and love, and they still followed Lily wherever she went. Clara watched them together, the little girl and her gray-muzzled guardian. She looked at the nook built into the wall, a permanent part of their home, just as Bear was a permanent part of their hearts. The house was safe because of new wires and breakers, but it was a home because of him. His love had been the true foundation they built on, stronger than any wall. Some guardians wear uniforms and carry badges. Others wear fur and leave paw prints on your heart. The line between tragedy and miracle is often guarded not by the things we expect, but by the things we almost turn away. Clara knew that one day, the nook by the bed would be empty, but the story would never end. It would be passed down, a part of their family's history, a testament to the dog who hadn't just saved their lives, but had taught them how to live them with more trust, more grace, and more love. She kissed his gray muzzle and turned out the light, leaving the two of them in the dark, the little girl and her night, bound by a story that began with smoke and fear and would end, always, with love. And in the quiet of the room, filled only with the sound of their breathing, that was enough. It was more than enough. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.